Good day to you. This sermon recap is for Proper 22, the year B, the year of Mark, priest at University Lutheran in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, on October 7th, the year 2012. This sermon recap is actually going to be more than what the sermon was yesterday. It's really the best use of what the sermon recap does. It allows me a broader swipe at things than what sometimes sermon time allows. So let me get you the text from Mark in front of us. This comes from Mark chapter 10, starting at verse 2. Some Pharisees came in, and to test Jesus, they asked him, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" Jesus answered them, "What did Moses command you?" They said, "Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her." But Jesus said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, he wrote this commandment for you. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." Then in the house, the disciples asked Jesus again about this matter. He said to them, "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her, and if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery." People were bringing little children to him in order that he might touch them, and the disciples spoke sternly to them. But when Jesus saw this, he was indignant and said to them, "Let the little children come to me. Do not stop them, for it is to such as these that the kingdom of God belongs. Truly I tell you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God as a little child will never enter into it." And he took the children up in his arms and laid his hands on them and blessed them. Let me do two things. I'll get to kind of the point of where the sermon went, but also a bit of setup here that was also part of the sermon. That we miss a few things, and you have to hear this text, the difficult text, especially for those of us who have been divorced, that to take the question and the answer at face value as an honest question is one thing, and we have to wrestle with that. But all the other pieces that build and lead up to this question, if we lift this text out of its context, we don't hear at all what Jesus is saying. And in fact, I said yesterday, to miss this one point of the Gospel of Mark, I think Jesus does other things in his life, death, and resurrection. But to miss this one point, I don't know how we get to any of those other points. I don't know how we get to any of those other things that Jesus would want us to hear and to see. So, you have to remember where we've been in this Gospel of Mark. Something that we miss in the reading of the lectionary text is the very beginning of chapter 10, 2 verses, 1 and 2. Jesus left that place and went to the region of Judea and beyond the Jordan, and the crowds again gathered around him, and as was his custom, he taught them. There is this turning in the Gospel of Mark after this middle place that Jesus literally turns south toward Jerusalem, but also spiritually and figuratively turns toward his death. He has already predicted twice that the Messiah is going to die in Jerusalem, and so he turns to go there. In just a few verses, a third prediction, a third promise, that the Messiah is going to Jerusalem to die. It's at this place, at the river Jordan. Now think in the hearing of the gospel. If the Gospel of Mark is being told to you or read to you, that you hear it, that Jesus has turned and he's in the region of Judea, just past the river Jordan, instantly in our head we hear John the Baptist. And so now these Pharisees, some of these Pharisees, come and wish to test Jesus, and they ask him a question about divorce. Saints, this question is worth the weight of your head, literally, because it cost John the Baptist his life. Because he railed against Herod, King Herod, about divorcing his wife and marrying his brother's wife, Herodias, and taking her to be his wife. And so this question is not a neutral question. If it was, Jesus simply could have answered it as a neutral question, because lots of folks had weighed in on this question already. There was two major Jewish schools of thought during this time. The Shammai, they said that nobody could divorce except for the one piece of adultery, and so that's why Matthew includes it in his gospel. But then the Hillels, another school of thought, said that a man could divorce his wife literally for burning supper. It's mentioned. It's listed as one of the reasons appropriate to divorce your wife, or if she was insolent, if she spoke back, you could divorce. And so, if the question is an honest, straightforward question to Jesus, he certainly could have taken up a place on this wide scale of answers, this continuum, and it would have been no big thing to say, this is where I believe is what is lawful. But the question is asked in a way to the one who goes to Jerusalem to die, and it's a killer's question. It's a question intended to put Jesus' head on the platter, so to speak. So there's that, right? Jesus answers it, and this is where I began my sermon yesterday. Jesus always gets in his licks. Jesus in the Gospel of Mark always gets his money's worth. There are ways that in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is stretched and pulled and molded and shaped into this thing that is Messiah, into this shape that is Messiah, like the woman, the conversation with the Syrophoenician woman. That in this banter back and forth, Jesus seems to, in the Gospel of Mark, grow into, is rabbied into by this woman, a new understanding of Messiah. But not when it comes to the opponents. Jesus always gets his licks in, and so they say to Jesus, is it lawful? And Jesus first says, what does Moses say? And they say Moses said that a husband could draft a letter of dismissal and divorce his wife. And Jesus then turns the whole tables. And this is where Jesus is so clever. I'm sure he's glad that I think so. But he says, Moses did that for you. God did that for you because of the hardness of your heart. Now again, instantly in the telling of the story, who in the Exodus story had the hard heart, had his heart hardened? It's Pharaoh. And so those on the side of right, God's people, struggled against Pharaoh, who had his heart hardened and wouldn't let the people go, wouldn't act as God intended Pharaoh to act and set the people free. Jesus says, in an instant, turns the tables and turns the conversation, that those who wish to come and be lawful, righteous, good, are the ones who are declared to have a hard heart because they dismiss anyone. They have unintended what God has intended. That's the big thrust of this text. That's the big thrust of this Sunday. We get Genesis chapter 2, the creation story. We get Psalm 8, what are human beings? That you would be mindful of them, that you have made them just a little lower than the angels, that you have made them just a little lower than holy beings. It's the fact that God has intended us to be a certain way, and we find ways, and even baptize ways, and even legalize ways to dismiss people. And that's the piece, again, that at the end of the gospel, that Jesus takes up children. We've had children in 9 and 10 all through Mark, that we keep hearing Jesus says that the kingdom of God is like this. Life is like this. You take a child and you bless it. And again, don't think innocent, cute little child. That's not what Jesus is driving at. Children in this place, in this society, legally, morally, righteously, had no access to God, had no value in some ways in the Roman society or in that time and place. You didn't even have to count them on census. It's to take those who couldn't even find a way to complain when the disciples wanted to dismiss them. Jesus had to speak on their behalf. Jesus takes these ones, a little girl, a little boy, and blesses them, and says, the kingdom of God belongs to these. See, this is what God intends. None of us who have gone through a divorce, I don't think, most of us, would ever say that we found God's intent in that painful process of untangling lives, of undoing promises, of disarranging families. That the Genesis text, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, what God has joined together, let no one put asunder. That's the intent of God. And to find ways to legally, spiritually, validate undoing what God intends is an offense to God. It is an offense to this Jesus. And so all through this section of Mark, Jesus says if your eye causes you to sin, if your hand causes you to sin, if your foot causes you to sin, if it takes you away from this life, that which God intends, do away with it. That there is nothing worth, even yourself, in how you order the world and justify yourself, that's worth missing this kingdom of God in this space where there is this new possibility of doing again and acting in ways that God intended from the very beginning. That God intends in the person of the Christ. That God intends in the space around the person of the Christ. That we have in this Messiah, that we have this space, that we are set free. We are set free from this burden of trying to order our lives in a way that we live self-intended at the cost of dismissing all these other folks. Saints, it's been building in Mark since 7. Jesus is declared unclean. He's been accused in chapter 2 and chapter 5 and chapter 7. Unclean hands. And then all these other folks have been dismissed and dismissed and dismissed. And then Jesus is found out to be the one who keeps including that one and that one and that one and that one. That the kingdom of heaven is like this. That we are freed from this knee-jerk obsession of ours to declare ourselves right, even legally, lawfully, righteously, at the cost of someone else. There is this tremendous freedom in Mark chapter 10. That Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like this. And if it's like this, that we no longer have to justify ourselves, that we no longer have to have enough faith or have enough hope or have enough righteous deeds or have enough good works, that this is what God intended from the very beginning, to declare us and make us holy, good, mountains and seas and valleys and hippos and all of creation God declares good in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, when he makes Adam and Eve, when he makes man and woman, when he makes human beings and gives them his own spirit and his own breath, God declares that very good. And we have been working ever since that moment to unintend what God intended. This is what Jesus is driving at. This is what Jesus is driving at in this whole section of the Gospel of Mark. And if we miss this, whatever else Jesus might intend in his teaching and what might come along with his death, resurrection, and ascension, it really doesn't matter. If we use Jesus' life, death, resurrection for the purpose of excluding others. Do you hear that? Jesus turns his face toward Jerusalem to die, and he's asked a trick question. And Jesus turns that and tricks us and them by saying this is what God intends. From the very beginning, this is what God intends. Do not unintention what God from the beginning desires. Grace to you and peace. In all things, be well.